was on this day in 1921. Black Wall Street was a prosperous community in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Black people in the Greenwood district were well-to-do and confident about their self-made success. All that changed, though, when a white mob, fueled by a false accusation, set fire to their safe haven, killing hundreds of people. Well, now 100 years later, we're still trying to uncover the truth about the massacre that went largely unknown by the masses. Our Leslie Foster sat down recently with some of the descendants to talk about their family's story.
A tip of the hat from the man once called this country's merchant prince, Mr. T.J. Elliott, owner of the largest African-American department store in the U.S. at the time. This was the first store in Muskogee, but the Elliott family would soon expand into Tulsa in 1918. They were part of the Oklahoma land rush back in the 1890s and saw it as a frontier of freedom. And in time, they would build on what was once Indian territory.
They were able to acquire 300 acres of land, a hotel, a bank, a theater, a chain of department stores. They owned office buildings. Their supply for the department stores came in from Europe, from Mexico, from all over the nation. So their clientele was black, white, and Native American.
The 10,000 square foot Elliott department store drew crowds clamoring to see the marble floors and chandeliers, the finest goods money could buy, and the celebrated fashion shows. It was a respite of sorts from the harsh realities of life.
It was a space for black people to imagine during a time of racism and segregation, to be able to go in a store and go up to the counter and try on a hat. Something that's seemingly mundane. But not only are you able to try on a hat, but you're trying on a hat in a business where it's owned by black people, run by black people, and it's supporting the black community.
This community would come to be known as Black Wall Street, but it was bigger than just commerce.
They found ways to become educated. They used their skills to build up their community. The dollar circulated within the community several times over. They supported one another. This is a photograph of our family, and this was taken in 1910. This house behind them they built, that house is still standing today.
Mary Elliott, Dr. Tolly Elliott, and his son Tolly Elliott Jr. are the beneficiaries of that legacy.
They were unabashed about who they were as people and what they had.
Pride, a lot of excellence running throughout the entire photo.
Mary is the family historian and curator at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Her brother, Tolly, is the chief medical director for the Mary Center, and his son, Tolly Jr., is a student at Howard University. We met up at the Gathering Spot in D.C., a private club for black people to have these kinds of discussions.
You knew that you were literally, like they say, standing on the shoulders of giants. You knew that you were right there, that you came from that stock, you came from that expectation.
Back in 1921, the Elliots were expecting to expand their chain of department stores and pass them down through the generations. That dream would have to wait. Everything changed on May 31st, when a 19-year-old black man and shoe shiner, Dick Rowland, stepped into an elevator on the other side of town.
He encountered a young lady he had seen before. They'd talked before. Her name is Sarah. As he entered the elevator, he tripped, and when he tripped, he reached for her, and she screamed. There was someone who worked in the store who claimed that Dick Rowland had attacked this young woman. Sarah ultimately said he had not attacked her, but at this point, he was already taken off to the prison, to the courthouse.
White mobs gathered to lynch Rowland. Black men newly back from World War I gathered to protect him. The groups clashed, and that set off a frenzy.
These white residents essentially razed the black community. They plowed through 40 blocks of the black community, burning it. They loot the homes. They shoot the residents. They beat people. They burn their homes down. They burn the churches. They destroy the schools.
There were black bodies in the streets, but that's not all. The white residents had planes. They dropped dynamite onto homes and businesses, pulverizing them. The people who escaped were rounded up and put into internment camps. Among the thousands taken from their homes and livelihoods was Sernoria McGowan Johnson.
She was a young child during the massacre, and her family was subjected to all of that violence. They were forced into the internment camp, and it was a white woman whom her mother worked for who came out and got them out of the camp.
She went on to lead the Washington Bureau of the National Urban League and work with Big Six leaders and President Lyndon Johnson to get civil rights laws passed. But Aunt Nora never talked about the trauma of Tulsa, and the history books left this entire chapter to be forgotten, an effort by the local, state, and federal government to conceal the truth. 100 years after the deadliest race riot in this country's history, most people have no idea that it even happened. How is that possible?
It has everything to do with the school systems today. History is written by the victors. They don't want to look bad, especially now.
And then it's ripped out from under them, and then you have someone say, see, they're lazy, they don't appreciate education, they don't want a business, they're not interested in success, and they don't tell the history about, in fact, there was a time that they did all these things, and now they're forced to have to rebuild.
As head of the National Negro Business League, T.J. Elliott was at the center of the effort to restore homes and livelihoods. Dr. Elliott keeps this image of his inspirational namesake from a promotional calendar in his home. It is the one item the family has from their department store that was burned a century ago.
It is just a reminder that success is in you, and just keep going.
It's telling you, you can't fail. Your family hasn't failed, so why would you fail? Keep moving forward. It's like fuel. It's like fuel.
The Tully, who graduated from high school 4 years after the Tulsa Race Massacre, likely shared that same sentiment. So where do we go from here as a nation?
I kind of like the perspective of calling people out. I think it's okay. I think it forces people to acknowledge the horrors of who they were. It doesn't mean who they have to be.
We were able to bring a nation out of the bondage of slavery. We still have work to do to bring a nation out of the bondage of racism. 100
years later, Tulsa descendants are left to wrestle with what justice might look like for the loss of loved ones, property, and community. They were never made whole again, and they never got the insurance money they paid for. These Elliots intend to make sure this story continues to be told, and they are committed to continuing the work of their ancestors and the conversation around who we are as a nation and the obligations we have to each other.
You know, 100 years later, it's practically criminal how this has been washed from the pages of history. This doesn't jump off the pages as a riot, more like a localized Holocaust, because of how the ripple effects have gone down to generations. I know that you wanted to talk some more about some of the families and the businesses that were affected.
You know, one of the things we didn't get to talk about in the story, and we referenced the fact that homes were looted, but imagine someone forces you out of your home using violence. They take your prized possessions that you have worked for, and those prized possessions end up in homes of people you go to eventually work for. You had your own business, your own livelihood, you've lost that. Many black people ended up going to work for white families who had the items that were in their homes now in their homes. And so there was nothing that these black families could do about that. And so you had the trauma of losing everything and the trauma of having to see the very things that you lost in someone else's home. It really is an incredible story. The Elliott family story is shared prominently in the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and we have a link to the digital assets for the Tulsa exhibit on our website.
Are there any current efforts underway to try and reconcile with what happened for these families?
It's interesting that you say that. There's been a lot of conversation about reparations. There is a commission looking into the Tulsa Race Massacre. There is an effort to try and locate the mass graves of hundreds of people who have died in anonymity because they were people. And so we'll have to see what happens. But it also could be that what happens with this conversation around reparations in Tulsa may help us as a nation to have a broader conversation.
Well, it's absolutely significant. It deserves to be in the pages of history with
sure does.
all of these other seminal moments. Les, we appreciate you bringing this to us. This is fantastic.